There are three reasons why I'm here. There's a bad reason, there's an outstanding reason, and there's a reason that is better than outstanding. The bad reason is because some of you might think I'm an expert. I have been in the Middle East for 13 years. I can say salam alaikum, and that's about it. I am with McKinsey and I look after what we do with governments, and I've had the privilege of working in all the Gulf countries in places like Yemen and Libya, and did have, I think it was a privilege at the time of meeting with, on a number of occasions, the Assads to talk about whether we might be able to help them in Syria. So I've had some sort of understanding or some experience in the region, but the one thing that I've learned is that the more that I know, the less I understand. I don't think there's anybody who 2 years ago would have said that what we have today is what they would have seen. I don't think there's anybody in this room who will look at 2025 and begin to recognize the map or the conditions facing the Middle East or indeed the world. So me being here as an expert is a very bad reason. The outstanding reason is, of course, because it's about Syria and the Syrian people. And this is a moment, it's a historical moment. And as we just heard, this is not the time for, in fact, the biggest danger to the world is when good men and women remain silent, they remain spectators, they don't take action. And this really is a time for action, for activity, because otherwise we deserve what we get, and Syria deserves better than it has gotten recently. And of course there's a third reason, which is a much better reason even than an outstanding one. The real reason that I am here, and the real reason that at least 80% of you are here, is because of Rania Sukhar. I've been with McKinsey for 27 years. I have worked with literally thousands of extraordinarily bright people from Harvard, Stanford, all the best schools in the world. In my life, there are probably less than a dozen people who I have worked with who stand out in my mind, and Rania is one of them. And truly, if she picks up the phone and asks me to do something, I will do it. And the reason for that is because she combines, I think, some extraordinary gifts. She combines purity, a purity of purpose. You know that when you deal with her, that whatever it is that she's trying to do comes from the best of places. And she also has a passion for performance. And that is a story that ran strongly in the early days of 2011, a breathless story of how one man's action, a butterfly, caused this ripple effect around the world. And you immediately get into the whole speed of the story, and you get into Google, and you get Google executives who are tearful. And before you know it, this story, which started in a square that nobody heard of in Tunisia, ends up in Silicon Valley. And that is a great, great story, and people lapped it up, and maybe it's true. There's another story that starts on the 19th of August, 1953, and that is the date when President Mossadegh, there was a coup against a democratically elected president in Iran with the combined efforts of the CIA and the British Secret Service, which then resulted in the installation of the Shah, and then the deposition of the Shah, and then Khomeini coming in, and the beginnings of the Sunni and Shia sectarian divide, and the split in power in the Middle East between one group and another group. Right? You could start that story there. And that is a story of conspiracy and dark forces and domination. There's another story that starts on the 5th of December 1978, starting in a different part of the world. That's the day that Deng Xiaoping in China was nominated by the Communist Party to be head of the military, which was then really the most powerful. And Deng Xiaoping, from that point of strength, having seen off the Gang of Four and Mao's legacy, opened up China. And it opened up China from being an insignificant economy which nobody really not worried about, to being one which is dominating the factories of the world. It is the second largest economy. It's pushing the West back, and frankly makes it very, very hard for countries like the Middle East to move forward. I mean, if it's difficult for America and for Europe to beat the Chinese, how on earth, as a struggling Arab nation, do you actually compete against the Chinese in manufacturing and the Indians in services? What space is there left for economic development? Of course, there's September the 11th, 2001. That's a very important date. That's the date when America said simply, that's it, we've had enough, no more, we're going to stop it, we're going to take charge. And then there's what is sort of my favorite date, which is the 28th of June, 1914, which is the day that Gavrilo Princip shot the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. And that bullet, in my view, is still ricocheting around the world, because what happened? That led to the First World War, that led to the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, that resulted in the Sykes-Picot Act in 1916, which carved up the Arab world between the British and the French. It resulted in creating the conditions in Germany for Hitler to rise, which resulted in the Holocaust, which resulted in the creation of the State of Israel, and then today we have missiles being fired into Gaza. Look, this bullet is still ricocheting, and I think that that one shot has probably had the most profound impact in shaping the world that we are in. So, on to the third question, where are we going? Of course, this is the question that everybody wants to know the answer to. It's the one that is unanswerable. But if I focus a bit on Syria, there are sort of two ways that at least I think about it. The first way that I think about it is back to the future. And sometimes to understand where you might go, you have to understand where you might have come from. And one of the things that I thought was more interesting was going back to 1919 and looking at the results of the King Crane study that was done then. That was done by the US, and it went to 39 Syrian cities, it went to 300 villages, listened to 3,000 petitions and spoke to over 30,000 people. And it asked in 1919 of the Syrian people of Greater Syria, what did you want? They did not want the French mandate. They did not want the Balfour Declaration and arbitration of Israel. They want a unified Syria. That is what they wanted. And in fact, 9 months later, they, under the leadership of the Arabs, they created a single state, and they met as the Syrian National Congress in March 1920 in Damascus to create the state of Greater Syria. Of course, the French were going to have none of that. And they had some good reasons. They actually got a lot of people who were in Syria who said, well, whilst the Arabs might want a Greater Syria under an Arab flag, we don't. And what came out of that? Well, there were 5 separate states that the French created to reflect the difference in points of view, because lots of minorities were very worried. So you had the state of Aleppo, you had the state of Damascus, you had a state around Latakia, you had the Jebel Druze, and you had the Alawite state of Latakia, and you had Greater Lebanon, which was created to protect the Christians. And then in 1936, if that wasn't enough, you had the state of Al Jazeera was created for the Kurds, and then in Golan there was a separate state for the Circassians. So there you have, in no time at all, you've moved from having a greater Arab state for the Syrians to 6 separate states, because all these minorities were very concerned about their freedom and wanted to have their own state and their own protection. And the French knew that very well, and that worked really quite well. So, one of the thoughts is, as we talk about what the future might look like, when I get asked about what might the future look like of the Arab world after the Arab Spring, I say, I don't know. Just look at the map of the Arab world in 1920, and what gives us any thought that in 2020, 100 years later, a lot of the Sykes-Picot Act will be unwound. Look what was caused the Iraq War. A lot of that was because of the misdrawing of the state of Iraq in Kuwait and Kurdistan. So what might the future look of the region? And of course we all have pathways to certain destinations that we are concerned about. We look at what happened in Lebanon, 15 years of civil war, 120,000 people killed, still unresolved. We look at Algeria, we look at 8 years of civil war, and nearly 200,000 people killed, and Algeria is still not resolved. Is that a possible outcome for Syria? You know, it could be. Sadly, I would love it not to be. A year ago, I was arguing with Syrian friends and saying Assad's days were numbered. You can't do the cruelty and the death that you have been putting onto your people and survive. And you know, Syrians, none of them said, they sure can. Right? Just look at the Arab world, look at the history, the not distant history of where brutality kept people in power. You can't wish this system away. I hope that they are wrong, but it's something that I think we need to bear in mind, because doing nothing is not going to move them away. If anything, the existing regime is stronger now than it was 6 months ago. So I think we do have to be sober about it. I don't think it can ever be what it was again, and I hope it moves away very quickly. But inactivity is really not a way to solve the problem. And as I think at least about what's happening in the Middle East, as you try to predict the future, there are three basic powers, three basic forces that always need to be balanced. And there's a rebalancing between them in the Middle East. And those three forces are the bullet, the ballot, and the book. And as you change that order between the bullet, the ballot, and the book, so your outcomes about how you think things might look like. If the bullet is the dominant force, then you end up with somewhere that looks like Algeria. If you think the ballot is going to succeed, you might end up somewhere like Turkey. And if you think that the book is going to succeed, you might end up somewhere like Saudi Arabia. And so as you think about what you want to do and what the role of Jusoor might be, you need to be able, I would encourage you to think about how can you be a force to reshape that balance between the bullet, the ballot, and the book. So the final bit that I wanted to just talk about is about Jusoor. So what does that mean for you, or what could it mean for you? First of all, I would say what any half-decent consultant always does. Whenever we get asked a question, the first thing we do is step back and ask the question why. The second thing we do is who else has done this before, and let's see what we can do, not to reinvent the wheel. Let's see what we can do. What do they say? You know, a consultant is somebody who something about watches and times, and they borrow your watch and tell you the time, something like that. Hey, that's not a bad idea. All it means is that we're smart and we want to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. So I would look around the world. There are many, many other diaspora organizations who have done great things and from whom you can learn. And I'm just going to suggest 4 institutions that you reach out to and contact. The first one is called IDEA, and it's the International Diaspora Engagement Alliance. They have done a lot. And there is an annual Global Diaspora Forum, which is it's been held twice. It was held earlier this year in the White House, and Hillary Clinton gave a speech, and she actually called out the Syrian diaspora as an example of people doing a lot, and she talked about moving forward by giving back and turning the brain drain into a brain gain. I think there's a lot to be gained from engaging with organizations like this. There's also the Diaspora Partnership Division of USAID. They also spend a lot of time and focus trying to make sure that ideas are shared and to move things forward. And I'd also just like to call out Ashoka as an organization. It's one that McKinsey is always very closely associated with. A lot of our people are involved in it. We helped to found it. And there's a woman there called Iman Bibaz, who's the VP of Global Diaspora Leaders, and she's based in Cairo, and she's been working with diaspora groups for more than 15 years. So there are many institutions, those are just 4. There are also many countries, of course, which are great examples of managing their diaspora well. I could choose many. I've chosen Ireland because I think they are widely recognised in terms of managing their diaspora to be one of the most effective of all. And I'll just spend a couple of minutes on talking about what they do. Of course, Ireland, in many cases, is different, but they have had many years, 20 years of sectarian difference. It's been violent, it's been vicious, but they have found a path forward. There is one organisation called Diaspora Matters, and it's run by Kingsley Aikins. And he is a specialist, created a consultancy now to help diaspora organisations set up the institutions and work effectively. And he has something called the Toolkit for Diaspora Strategies. So that is one person and one place that I think would be worthwhile going to. They also have the Irish Technology Leadership Group, which is taking the top 100 technology leaders of Ireland and trying to get them to work together to bridge the links between what's happening in Ireland and the technology centres in the world. They have created the Irish Innovation Centre in San Jose. They've also created the Irish and American magazine. This is ways for them to make sure that capital, human capital and intellectual capital flows between Ireland and other centres of excellence. They've also created the Worldwide Ireland Funds, and that was set up by Tony O'Reilly. He used to be the CEO of Heinz. He became a private equity player, one of Ireland's most successful entrepreneurs. They have raised over $350 million. In fact, the Irish diaspora has raised close to $1 billion in the last 20 years. And this is in 39 cities, 13 countries, supported 1,200 organizations and runs 100 events annually. Very active in terms of mobilizing the Irish diaspora. And finally, there is the Global Irish Economic Forum, which is set up by the main dancer of Riverdance. He created Riverdance and he became a very successful entrepreneur. And they have something called Gateway Ireland, which is using new technology and the internet to link the Irish diaspora with needs and as a way of giving. So that was, 4 institutions to look at, one country to put forward as a source of inspiration. And I'd like to sort of come towards the end by saying that I think Jusoor faces one key decision that it needs to make, and it's an existential decision, and it is, what do you want to be? Do you want to remain a focused organization that is concentrating on education, or do you want to become a broader umbrella organization like some of the Irish entities that I talked about? Both are needed. But that really is the debate. I wouldn't want to get stuck in the middle. If you choose to be a focused organization, then you've got the kernel of that already. If you want to become an umbrella organization, you will have to reinvent yourself. Of course, you can evolve from one to the next. There are challenges in whatever it is that you decide to do. What I'd certainly say, is that a vision, and you're long on vision and aspirations in this room, but a vision without a plan is a hallucination. So I would personally go short on visions, and I would go longer on plans. Trying to help your country, which is something that is very important and very passionate, is extraordinarily difficult. I'm working in Libya at the moment with an extensive diaspora in terms of trying to have an impact in Libya. They are having an impact in Libya, but it is difficult. If you look at the history of diaspora organizations, what are the challenges? The biggest challenge is unity. The fracturing in the countries from which the diaspora come are usually reflected in the diaspora organizations. As you think about what you want to do, think about Syria in 1920, and I hope that Jusoor doesn't become 6 different states. But it's something that you have the human mind, the human spirit. That you're in, but what I would like to do is to celebrate what you've done. As I understand it, you've been able to fund 50 students to continue their education in a war-torn country, and you've got 150 in the pipeline. This is 200 lives that you have helped to transform. That's more people than there are in this room. If in my lifetime I could help 200 people in that way, I would be able to go and meet my maker or whatever it is that's in the next chapter, feeling that I'd accomplished something much more worthwhile in life than being a management consultant. So I think you should really celebrate that. I'm thinking of something that Steve Forbes said, not generally a great intellectual, but I think he hit pay dirt when he said, the real source of wealth is not material things, it is the human mind, the human spirit, the human imagination, and our faith in the future. Thank you very much.